So we start today this new message series that will take us through the end of the school year, entitled Love is a Battlefield. And it actually fits into the kind of the story of our church, especially over the last 4 or 5 months. But I'll explain that in just a minute. To start with, at the front end of this series, let me ask you just a few questions, and I want you to reflect on them with me as I do it aloud. Here's the first one. Do you think that we, as Christians, if you're not a Christian, then it doesn't apply to you, that's okay, but do you think that we, as Christians, talk about love on Sunday morning in sermons, in books, on the radio, with each other, whatever? Do you think that we as Christians talk about love as much as Scripture does? Here's a very close follow-up question to that. Do you think that we emphasize love with the same priority that Scripture does? I.e., Exhibit A, those verses from John 15 that I read at the start of the service today. Now here's a similar but different question. Do you think that we as Christians, or we in church, do you think that we talk about love more than we actually do it? What's been your experience? Which do you think is more true? And this may be the most important question, and it comes on the heels of that first set of questions. What do you think the price is of perhaps not emphasizing the centrality of love the way that Scripture does, or perhaps talking about it and not actually doing it the way that Scripture envisions? What's the cost to that? My own experience, you can agree or disagree, my own experience is that as a lifelong Christian with several lapses into atheism and Buddhism, which is a story for another day, I have seen no greater subject trivialized by Christianity than the subject of love. It's glib. You know what that means? We say it easily, and we don't recognize that it's very difficult to do. In fact, I would wager to you that there is no more difficult commitment you could make in your life than the commitment to do something that when Jesus says it, sounds very simple. This command I give to you, so says John 15:12. This command I give to you, love one another the way that I have loved you. It takes you about 15 seconds to say. It takes you a lifetime to begin to figure out and do. Would you at least admit, along with me, that perhaps the subject of loving one another is one of the places where we as God's people are guilty of trivializing a most profound subject, of not letting our actions match our words, of, as James, the author of the New Testament, says it, we are hearers of the Word of God, we are not doers of the Word of God in this respect per se. Now here's where it fits into the storyline of our church. We talked for 4 weeks between Christmas and Easter in a series entitled Big Love about what Jesus says are the two most important concepts in the entire Bible. Everything in Scripture flows from these two things. What are they? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If you get these two things straight, everything else should begin to fall in line. That's what Jesus says. Well, we spent 4 weeks talking about those two concepts. And perhaps you, like me, would say, man, it was good, and it was moving, and it was empowering. It was stirring. It made me want to do it. But it's just not enough. And the reason it's not enough is because it stayed at the principle or conceptual level. It was just an idea. And we did a really good job talking about the idea. What we need to do next is we need to talk about how we actually love each other. What's that entail? What's that require? What behaviors and attitudes are mandatory if you and I are going to be people as Jesus followers who say, I will obey Jesus' command. I will be somebody who seeks in my life to love you the way that Jesus first loved us. How do we do that exactly? This is where, in my opinion, one of the breakdowns occurs in the modern American church when it talks about love. We will speak about loving each other, and we rarely spend the time to work through how we actually do it. Because it doesn't take a lot of time to figure out that love is difficult. For an idea that can be sentimentalized so easily, it can seem so female. Let me speak for the male race. It can seem so female, so feminine. Just try to do it, and you'll discover how so masculine it is. It's not easy. It is, if you will, in the words of Pat Benatar, a battlefield. It is the greatest struggle you will ever enter in your lifetime. To love your neighbor as yourself, or to love each other the way that Jesus first loved us. And we're going to spend the rest of the school year talking about how we as a church community can actually do that for each other. To take it from being a good idea to something that's real and actual in your life and in my life and in our life together and in our work here in South Grand Rapids. To get the series started, I want to show you another passage of Scripture, this from the New Testament, written by one of Jesus' disciples named John, in a little letter that he wrote called 1 John, written to a church in southwest Turkey called Ephesus. And it is, in chapters 3 and 4 of this letter, one of the most exquisite descriptions of the high stakes of love in the life of a church or an individual Christian. I want you to see what's at stake in our commitment, or the lack thereof, to loving each other the way that Scripture entails. That's all that I want to do today. I want you to see what's at stake, if we do it or if we don't. Here are the two passages that I want us to entertain today. One from 1 John 3, the next will be from 1 John 4. 1 John chapter 3, picking up in the middle of a paragraph starting in verse 14. John writes, "We know that we have passed from death to life because we love one another. Whoever does not love remains in death. All who hate a brother and a sister are murderers, and you know that murderers do not have eternal life living in them. We know love by this, that Jesus laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love live in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses to help? My little children, let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action. This idea of loving each other is going to knit together much of 1 John, certainly all of 1 John 3 and 4. Here's another way that John talks about that same subject barely a chapter later, beginning in chapter 4, picking up in verse 7. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sin. Beloved, since God loved us so much, we ought also love one another. No one has ever seen God at any time. If we love, God lives in us, and his love is perfected in us. Can you feel that you're standing on the high edge of a skyscraper, seeing the wide and grand panorama of what love can and should be through the eyes of the Apostle John? Do you feel that? Do you feel the grandeur and the majesty of his understanding of what it means to love one another? I'd like to draw your attention to only 3 concepts from these 2 parallel passages. There are more that we could talk about. Here are 3. Here are 3 ways that John tells us that everything is at stake in our practice of loving each other. Here's the first one. Here's where you see it in 1 John 3. He says that we know we have passed from death to life because we love one another. Whoever does not love remains in death. Now the words are different, but the idea is the same. The next chapter, when he says, Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. Now here's the commonality between those 2 passages. He's referring to some very biblical pictures of what happens to us when we make the decision to become followers of Jesus. The first one in John 3 is that we change or move from being dead to being alive. Now obviously he's not talking about something physiological. Although those of us who believe in the resurrection of Jesus that we celebrated 2 weeks ago, it actually someday will be physical. We move from death to life like Jesus did. But there's something far more at stake and far more present tense about what John means. He means that most of humanity lives most of its life being what he would call dead. That we don't understand how to live right. That we don't really get how to be consistent and moral. That we don't understand how to be consistently unselfish and not selfish instead. We live desensitized to God and his presence in the world and other people. All of that taken together, the word for it is, most of humanity lives its life dead. And in the process of being a Christian, you are being made, his word, alive. You are waking up to how God wants you to be, to how the world should be, to how you should treat people, to how you can be consistent with the help of the Spirit of God in those things. You are moving from death to life. Now 1 John chapter 4 uses different words, same idea. There's a movement involved in being a Christian person. In this case, it's that you are being born by God to a new life. You were born of God. This is where some Christians today and in the last 100 years in America get the idea of being born again. This is one of those kinds of passages. Then he also says, you as a Christian person are beginning to know God. Whereas, before you were a Christian, you didn't know him. Maybe you saw his shadow on the wall. Maybe you heard the rustling of his feet around the corner, but you never really knew him with any depth or intimacy. To become a Christian means you begin to know God. Now here's the rub, okay? You could ask these questions or raise these concepts to a room of Christians in most settings across our country and elsewhere in the globe. And you could say, show of hands, how many people are Christians in the room? Most of the hands go up. Then you say, how many people in the room think about themselves that you were once dead in the way that I described it, and now you are becoming alive spiritually? Again, most of the hands raise. And then you say, how many people of you feel like God is giving you a new birth in life, and because of your relationship with God through Jesus, you are beginning to be a new person, something new? Many hands go up. And then last, you say, how many people in the room feel like you know God in a way that is so different and distinct and better from what you were before when you were a Christian? All the hands go up. Usually by that point there's clapping, weeping, laughter, cheers, all kinds of things. The next question should be, prove it to me. Prove it to me. And John says, there is only one proof of God's activity in your life. There is only one proof of whether or not you know God the way that you say, of his rebirthing activity in your life, of your movement from being dead to alive spiritually. There is only one proof. What is it? Do you love each other? That's it. That's what John says. The single greatest indicator of your own spiritual health, or the spiritual health of anybody around you, or the spiritual health of the church you call home, is whether or not you love each other. Have you ever been a part of a Christian group, or a Christian circle of friends, or a Christian church, or a Christian school, where upon reflection you say, yeah, I don't know that this was true. I know that we talked a good game about being in this spiritual transformation process, of being reborn by God, about knowing God in a way that others don't through Jesus. Well, we talked a good game about it, but I think a lot of it was faulty. A lot of it, frankly, was hot air. The reason you know it is because the thing that should have been the top priority wasn't. Many other things crowded out the simple concept that is oh so hard to actually do. Just love each other. Love each other deeply and profoundly the way that Jesus and God loved us first. This is the high stake of doing what Jesus, and then after him, John, his apostle, commands. This is the first high stake. You cannot claim to be in that spiritual transformation process if you are not committed to learning to love. The two are incongruent. I would confess to you, very frankly, that I spent most of my 20s and my teens, and maybe even some of my 30s, not understanding that the heart of Christianity, the heart of my practice of Christianity, is loving you the way that Jesus loves us both. No way. There were so many other things that crowded it out of its central place. What spiritual habits do you have in place in your life? How much money do you give to your church, or to other people? How knowledgeable are you about Scripture? Are you avoiding all of the do's or all the do-nots that people have in place about what good Christian people should or should not do? Are these the things that occupy your time? Are you just faking it, like so many Christians are? Well, here's the deal. Jesus, and then John after him, says there is one litmus test for your spiritual life and your spiritual health. Do you love each other? Are you committed in your own life to loving the people around you like Jesus did? That's why it matters so much. That's why as a church, for instance, we can't talk about it enough. Now here's the second high stake. You think that's high? Only gets higher from here. This is the other major concept that John talks about twice, once in each of these parallel passages. John says, we know love by this in John 3, that Jesus laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. In 1 John 4, he says very much the same thing. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. You need to remember who wrote those words. I didn't write those words. You didn't write those words. Somebody 200 years removed from Jesus did not write those words. A first-hand witness of the life and death of Jesus wrote those words. In fact, the entrance into all of this discussion of loving each other in 1 John 3 and 4 is 1 John 3:14, which reads, "This is the message that we have received from the beginning." What beginning? The beginning of the whole movement, from Jesus. This is the message we have received from the beginning. Pause. Love one another. John spent 3.5 years of his life traipsing around ancient Israel, watching Jesus, listening to Jesus, being taught by Jesus, following the example of Jesus, being befuddled and confused by Jesus. John was there in John 15 on the last night of Jesus' life when Jesus said, "Here's my command to you. Love each other the way that I have loved you." In fact, that idea is almost verbatim repeated in these verses. John was there when Jesus gave up his life on a cruel Roman cross. John saw it. He was a first-hand eyewitness of the events. 30 years after that, maybe 50 at most, he writes 1 John to a little church in southwest Turkey. And he says, this is the message that we have heard from the beginning. This is the message that was given by Jesus, in which we know he would want us to remain. Just love each other. This is the example that Jesus himself has set for us. Just love each other in the same way that I have loved you. The quote is from John 3, love each other the way that Jesus did. That means lay down your life for the sake of other people. Jesus did that. The model for our love is what he did. Therefore, this love that is the greatest spiritual indicator of what's going on in your life or your church, this love is the kind of love that lays its life down for other people. That's what John says. That means that there are things that you have that you will no longer care about for the sake of other people. That means there is time and energy in your life that you need to lay down or give away for the sake of other people. That means there's emotional capacity and energy that you usually reserve for yourself because you're trying in such a hard world to just stay some modicum above depressed, and other people need that from you. Lay down your life for the sake of other people. That's what it means to love each other, because that's how Jesus did it. And John says that's what we have to do. There is no other definition of love for John than Jesus. He laid down his life for the sake of us. Therefore, we, in order to love, lay down our lives for the sake of others. How far did Jesus take it? It took his actual life. He spent 3.5 years traipsing around ancient Israel, dealing with hard-headed, stubborn, confused, frustrated people, the best of whom his disciples really didn't understand him till after the resurrection. But he took it all the way to the ignominy of the cross that he could have thoroughly avoided, but he voluntarily undertook. This is what it looked like for Jesus to lay down his life. What about you? Would you like to know that you're moving from death to life? Would you like to know that you really know God? Lay down your life for other people. This is the instruction of the Apostle John in 1 John 3 and 4. Burn into your mind, carry with you every day you live. The expectation as a Christian person is to learn to love the way that Jesus did, to learn to sacrifice the way that he did, the way to give away yourself the way that he did. And in doing so, you will find Jesus' own words to be true. From John chapter 12, in which he says, if you give your life away for the sake of others, you will take it back. It is only in the giving that we receive. It is only when you give your life that you actually find it. These are the words of Jesus. That's high stake number 2. That's what's actually at stake in your choice and every church's choice about whether or not they're actually going to love each other, not just talk about it. And here's number 3. You only see it explicitly in 1 John 4. It's probably alluded to in 1 John 3. It's only explicit in 1 John 4. And again, if you thought the first 2 were big, this one is no less. John ends the paragraph in 1 John 4 by saying, my beloved, since God loved us so much, we ought also love one another. Now here it is. No one has ever seen God. If we love, God lives in us, and his love is perfected in us. One of the things that we've been fortunate as a church to receive over the last couple of months is a very detailed demographic study of South Wyoming and South Granville. We know a lot more about the people who are around here. Let me tell you some things about the people who live around us, who are, in essence, our mission field as a church. Only 40% of the people around us believe that spirituality is something that's important to them. I don't even mean just Christianity. I just mean the very vague, wide notion of spirituality. Less than half of the people, 4 out of 10, would agree that it's somewhat important or very important in their lives. That's all. Less than 30% of the people who live around us think that religious activities, like a worship service or a small group or anything, that any kind of religious activity is an important part of their life. So less than a third. Now the irony is that 36% of those around us would say they're conservative Christians. There's a problem. If almost 40% of the people around us say they're conservative Christians and less than a third say that religious practices are important to their life. Now, do you know that around us, almost 20% of the adults, 20% of the households around us have had a bad experience with church in the past, and it is a primary reason for them not coming to church today. That's 1 out of 5. And that's probably low, I would think. Here's my point. What did John say? John said, no one has seen God. God is invisible. The way he says it in his gospel, John chapter 1, verse 18, the first half, no one has seen God at any time. God's invisible. Philosophers, which is a subject that I enjoy reading and studying, philosophers have great arguments back and forth about these things that are called the proofs for God's existence. How can you prove that God exists? And some people say, well, human morality proves that God exists, or the universe and the orderliness of the universe proves that God exists. These are fascinating subjects. This is not the answer that John gives. John says God is invisible. You can't see God, which of course is actually true. You can't, even for those of us who love and follow Jesus. Except when? You can't see God, and what's the next phrase? If we love, God lives in us. Would like to wager a theory or a hypothesis to you. Let me tell you why 40% or less of the people in South Wyoming and Granville don't think that spirituality is important. Let me wager a guess as to why they think religious activity in their life or habits in their life aren't important. Let me wager a guess why 20% or more of the people around us would never think about going to church or being a part of God's people because of what's happened to them in the past. It's because we've forgotten that the greatest proof of God's existence is our love. This is what John says. Look at it. I don't want you to think that I'm making it up. Look at the underlined passage. No one has ever seen God yet. If we love, God lives in us, and his love is perfected in us. The truth is, there are many people in your life and around you, in our country and in our world, who don't believe in God because they haven't seen enough love. Period. I don't have the time, but I could tell you story after story of great thinkers and philosophers and professors of our day who would consider themselves agnostic or atheists. And they have all the intellectual reasons in the world for it, but you can always trace it back to some great moment of pain and hurt and frustration that they've had with God's people. They don't believe in God anymore because they haven't been loved. You are, if you are committed to loving each other, the greatest single proof that God is real. You are. Not somebody else, not them back then, you and us together. If we are committed to love, then God lives in us, and people will see it. And they'll believe. Love is the greatest apologetic. Love is the greatest proof that God's real, that he's alive. And if I'm half right about how poorly Christians do at matching their doing of love with their talking about love, maybe we can begin to see why so many people think that God can be kept on the margins of life, and at the very best is someone who is irrelevant, and at worst is someone who doesn't even exist. It's because we don't love. Supernatural love that defies what is normal in our world. Love that lays down its life for the sake of somebody else. That kind of love is so very rare. It is so very counter human nature. It screams that there is a supernatural reason why it's happening. It is proof of God's existence. This is what's at stake in your life as a follower of Jesus. This is, quite frankly, what's at stake in the life of our church. If we don't commit to loving each other, we give everyone the license to say, God isn't that real. I wonder how many Christians live day to day, today, in our day and time. I wonder how many Christians live their life thinking, I wonder if God's really real. And the reason behind it is they've never experienced either the giving of it or the receiving of it, the kind of love that John describes here. You want to make God real for yourself and others? Love other people. Here's the goal of the series. You may have seen this verse down at the bottom of that paragraph in 1 John 3. It's lovely to talk about things like the two great commandments. It's great to spend time talking about this powerful, life-changing concept of loving your neighbor as yourself. But that's not enough. We want to do what John describes here. And part of his counsel, part of his pastoral wisdom and instruction to this little church in southwest Turkey is just this. My little children, let us love, not in word and in speech, but in truth and in action. This is how the Apostle Paul says that same sentiment. From Romans chapter 12, verse 9. He says to the church in Rome about how to live together very simply. Your love must be sincere. Another way to translate that would be, let us love each other without hypocrisy. The goal of this series is for us, all of us, every single one of us, to make the commitment to love each other actually. To not just think that Jesus' ideas are great and moving and inspiring, but to actually say, we're going to do this. None of us are great at it. We are all remedial students in the school of love. But we are all going to be committed to actually loving the people around us that God's given us in our life, the people here. We as a church will say to each other, we are not just going to talk about love in John's words, in word and speech. We're actually going to love in truth and action. It's going to be real here. These are the high stakes of love. I dare say that if we, or any Christian group, or any Christian person anywhere, if we don't make the commitment to let our life be grounded and centered upon the idea of loving each other, we don't stand a chance. Of seeing our own life changed by God, of helping change the lives of those around us, we don't stand a chance. The high stakes of love, as represented in 1 John 3 and 4, tell us that if we are not committed to love, then we are not really being transformed spiritually. We are not really healthy spiritually. We are not really looking like the Jesus that we talk about. And maybe worst of all, we're acting like God doesn't really exist. And we're giving everybody, including ourselves, the license to say that he doesn't. These are the high stakes of love. So to you I say this morning, and to me I say this morning, and to us I say this morning, in the words of Paul, henceforth, may our love be sincere. May it be without hypocrisy. May it be real. Let's pray.